Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. And it's a bit of an odd podcast this week. We're going for a instant pod after the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 1917 victory over the New England Patriots Sunday night in Foxborough. And, obviously it's, in the words of NBC football poobah Fred Godelli, the biggest NFL regular season game in 25 years. And I'm not sure we're going to do it justice because there are just so many things to cover. I realized that after writing my column today, as we speak on Monday, that I barely mentioned Brady breaking the all-time passing yardage record in the NFL. And I don't know, it just didn't. It was almost like nobody really. It didn't occur to many people or anybody after this game. But anyway, a lot of interesting things happen on Sunday night in Foxborough, and I'm joined by Paul Burmeister, my friend from NBC. We're going to break down this game, and then later on in the podcast, we'll be joined by Boston Globe sports columnist Dan Shaughnessy, who. And I have no idea what he thought of the game. I did not see him at the game. But he'll always have an interesting and perhaps slightly acerbic take on what we saw in Foxborough. Well, Paul, set the stage for me. Where did you watch? What did you think?
I watched from my couch. I saw you during the pregame as Mike Tirico was walking out of the visitors' locker room to the field. When he got to the field, I saw Peter King right away. So I knew it was going to be a good night, but I watched from my couch. I watched again last night on a repeat, and I watched again this morning. And before we get into the game, I was wondering, as I was getting ready to talk to you this morning, who do you think went to bed later last night or this morning, you or Tom Brady?
Oh, that's a good. Well, I will tell you this. I talked to Brady about 10 minutes before 1 Eastern time this morning, and he told me that he was hoping to get some sleep on the plane. I'll tell you, he was pleasant, he was hoarse, and he was just absolutely wiped out when I talked to him last night. It was the weight of playing this game, number one, and also the weight of basically being being the center of so much attention, and then going out and winning this game, even though, Brady will tell you that, if he's played whatever it is, 305 games in his NFL career, this is probably about number 248 in terms of how he performed in the game. But again, a W is a W for Brady and the Bucs. The Bucs, by the way, and we'll talk about this a little bit, the Bucs are really, really beat up. We're only 4 weeks into the season, and they already have an injury plague that is probably worse than they had all of last season. So that is going to be bothersome for Tampa Bay, I think, in the next few weeks of this season. But Paul, let me just, if you don't mind, I'm just going to give you, as I was, woke up a few minutes ago, I have not slept very long, but as I woke up a few minutes ago and started to think, let's see, what are we going to talk about on this podcast? The most important takeaway for me is that both teams won Sunday night. Because I think anybody who watched this game would say that Mac Jones really did a very good job at sort of, I don't even mean slaying the Brady Dragons, because it's going to take him years and decades, if he ever even might do that. But this was about, as well as Brady coming back, it's about the New England Patriots saying to their fans and saying to everybody who follows this team in this region and around the country, it's okay. We're going to be all right. so I think that's one takeaway. I think the second takeaway that really interested me exiting this game is that this was really for Tom Brady more about um, you know, enduring this game, uh, enjoying it a bit if he could, but enduring this game because it was really a difficult game for him. As he told me just a few hours ago, one of the things that was really hard for him is not knowing what was coming an awful lot of the time. And for a quarterback, that's very disconcerting, Paul, as you know. I think if you scout your opponent and you really have a good feel for what your opponent is going to send your way, you know exactly what is coming. But Tom Brady told Clyde Christensen, his quarterback coach, on Tuesday at the start of the week, said, man, I've never really prepared, obviously, for New England in my career. And it's really hard. They do so many things. And the third thing, Blaine Gabbert, the backup for Tom Brady, told me this. And I spent 10 to 12 minutes with him on his way to the bus after the game. And I thought this was really educational. Tom Brady, Blaine Gabbert, Clyde Christensen, others in the quarterback meeting room basically took it upon themselves, Paul, to go out and to look at tape going back 8 or 10 years to see how Bill Belichick played certain guys on that, certain quarterbacks over the years. The reason they did this is because Tom Brady knew, based on his experience, that Bill Belichick was going to hit him with some stuff that isn't, 3 or 4 weeks old. Because, what happens in the NFL, teams break down the previous 4 opponents of the team that they're about to play. And in this particular case, Bill Belichick would go back years and come up with wrinkles that maybe the quarterback and the offensive coaches wouldn't expect in a particular game plan. And so those are a few of the things that I really found, I would say, interesting above a lot of the hypey, things in the stands. Brady. It was, with the exception of the time that Brady brought his team out onto the field to start the game for their first offensive series and the whole stadium booed, which I thought was really cute, honestly. Yeah. Everything else, everything about last night was New England fans having a love affair with Tom Brady.
Yeah, and I thought, you bring up a lot of great quarterback points. And obviously we knew coming in that quarterbacks were the ones we're going to keep a close eye on. But the way it played out was even better than we could have imagined. And I start with this takeaway. And as I kind of dip my toe in the reaction pool around the nation of what people are saying about this game, I might be in the minority, but I think Tom Brady outplayed Mac Jones. And I say that because even though it was, you mentioned in the 200s for Tom's best games, he got better as the game went on, and he found a way to get better on third down. His team found a way to get better on third down as the game got even more vital in the third and fourth quarter, whereas the Patriots really struggled on in those third down situations. And he really had 2 things going for him. And I don't know if this was the game plan coming in, Peter, or something they just evolved to or grew into. He had, number one, a game plan that was allowing him to throw outside the numbers and down the field a little bit. Mac Jones wasn't doing that. Mac Jones was terrific, had his best game, and I agree. The Patriots fans go home disappointed with the loss, but they feel great about what they have at quarterback. He was just working, like if you drew a rectangle box about 3 yards outside of each hash and about 10 yards down the field, they were only working in there. Brady was working much more the entire field, number one. I think that paid off when it came to third down. And number 2, he had a running game. Leonard Fournette mattered yesterday. And you can't say that about any one of the Patriots running backs. So he had a couple things going for him that Mac didn't. But I thought with the way he persevered and played that game, kind of like a batter who's down a 1-2 count the entire game, but finds a way to put the bat on the ball. Brady did that the entire game on a giant stage. And I think because of that, my number one takeaway is that he did outplay a rookie who had his very best game.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's a very good take. That actually, it's interesting. That's Clyde Christensen's take, because I said, man, Brady missed some throws in this game.
He did.
And we're not really used to seeing that. He missed more than we would normally think would be right, correct, everything like that. But I do think one of the things that happened in this game that's hard to sort of put your finger on. And again, look, I was really surprised the weather Sunday night in Foxborough, because the weather forecast was for some light rain. I mean, it rained pretty hard for, I'd say, at least a half of the game. It never stopped raining. You know what's funny, Paul? I was down on the field before the game, and at 7:29, I said, man, I'm feeling a few raindrops. Brady walked out at exactly 7:30 with a few teammates, and the rain picked up a little bit. And then for the whole time they were out for warm-ups, he came out 51 minutes before the kickoff, which, as crazy as this sounds, their PR guy, Nelson Luis, said he thought he would come out about 51 minutes before the start of the game. And I was thinking, about 51 minutes. That's not really about. He'll come out exactly 50. And he did. He came out exactly 51 minutes before the start of the game. But it started raining, and then over the next 10 to 15 minutes, it began to rain significantly. And that's the way it was for the next 4 hours. It was just, and when I came out of the press box at about 4:25 this morning, it was pouring. And it poured, I don't think it's raining right now, but here in Boston. But I think the way Clyde Christensen said it, he said, listen, when you have steady rain and you're trying to play a little bit of tempo, he said the problem becomes that then they don't take the ball between plays. So each time you get a snap of the ball is getting a little heavier, a little wetter, a little bit more slippery. And he said that became an issue at times during the game, where it was hard to get a normal grip on the football. But I also think, Paul, there was one other thing about how they played and the way they tried basically to play this game. Okay. They really wanted Leonard Fournette to have a big role in this game, because they thought, and they were right about this, they thought that the defense, the New England defense, was really going to try to tee off on Tom Brady. And Josh Uche had some moments in this game. Matt Judon had a lot of moments in this game. He really played well in this game. And so their speed up front really kind of, I would say, mitigated a lot of the stuff that I think they would have liked to do in the passing game. And Paul, I think if you notice something about this game, or at least I noticed it, you know, when Tampa Bay was really going well in the game is when they were given some relief on first down, by Leonard Fournette. It's arguable in the grand scheme of things that was Leonard Fournette's best game. And he hasn't had a lot of great games, obviously, for Tampa Bay, but that was Leonard Fournette's best game, was a member of the Bucs.
Yeah, over 20 touches for over 100 yards. And what I found really interesting about his role, Peter, is as both teams were kind of feeling each other out, and they got to a point in the second half where each of the offenses were like, okay, this is what we're going to do. They came out of breaks a couple of times, pounding the ball to Fournette in the screen game and the ground games. And you just knew that Byron Leftwich and Bruce Arians on the sideline, Tom Brady as well, are saying, we're going to Leonard early in this drive. We're going to give it to him and see what we can do. Another thing that stood out about the New England defense, and you've talked about it a little bit, I think it's a huge post-game storyline, is how they played Brady. And it was really fun watching pre-snap, Peter. They would be walking linebackers up into gaps and moving them around. But they weren't really bringing them that often. They were often bringing 3, 4, 5 people. They rarely brought more than 5, even though the majority of pre-snap looks, you could look at it and say, gosh, they're set up to bring 6 or 7. They only brought 7 one time that I can remember in the second half. And it was on a key third down deep in the red zone. And Brady found Brate down the seam right away, just like you're supposed to do, textbook against bringing 7. And that's why they were afraid to do it, because they knew Tom would get rid of the ball. That it became clear to me they were much more committed to pre-snap confusion than they were to the post-snap aggression with the blitz. It reminded me, I go all the way back to 2009. I spent that season on the road for NFL Network, and I ended up in a conversation on Monday night with Peyton Manning after a game they won in Miami. And this is when Rex Ryan was with the Jets, and they were one of the first teams to do this walk-around junk pre-snap look, where 6, 7 guys walk around. I said to Peyton, I'm like, how do you deal with that? Because I know you like to know pre-snap what they're doing. How do you know what they're doing? And he said, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but his point was, you don't know. And you stop beating yourself up trying to know. You figure out if you're protected. Can my protection protect me if they bring all these guys? You get the protection figured out, and then you just drop back and read. And I think that's what Brady was doing. They could block it up. He figured out during his drop, who was coming, who wasn't, what might be open. But I think the really good quarterbacks with that kind of defense, they don't try to figure it out before the snap, because that's where the Bill Belichick's of the world want to get you with that confusion. If you don't play that game and play the post-snap game, don't let yourself be confused pre-snap.
Right.
You end up winning. And I think Brady did that really well.
I want to read you part of what I wrote in my column, because it really addresses what you said. And if you love the X's and O's, this was an important part of the preparation for this game. All right, so here it is. The Bucs weren't in sync all night, but one of the plays they researched hard before the game came to fruition. Late in the first quarter, Brady lined up to see 7 New England defenders milling around the line. Who'd rush? Who'd drop? Brady didn't know, but he knew he'd seen this before. This is the kind of defense Brady played in 2018 against the Vikings. And it's one of the defensive formations Brady and his band of football researchers found when going back in time. As Gabbert told me, what we did this week was look at games throughout the last 10 years of opposing elite level quarterbacks. We look back at how Brady played Denver and Peyton back in 2013. We found this defense against the Vikings in 2018 sort of like a walk around, a lot of DBs on the field. We picked games and tried to get as much knowledge as we could of what we could potentially see. It was fun. It was great. At least we were going to be prepared. And that was something that Brady brought to the group, because Brady told them during the week, we're going to see a lot of things that I don't even know what they are. And I was there all the time. So we need to just use our heads. Let's go back and look at games he's played against Drew Brees, against Peyton Manning. And let's go back and look and see what he did to try to counter what they did well. And Paul, I think left unspoken in this is that also let's try to look at things that immobile quarterbacks have trouble with, and I think that really helped them a lot in this game, because afterwards, Clyde Christensen told me, he said, listen, not a lot. He said a lot was difficult about this, but we really weren't surprised by a lot of things that they did.
Yeah. And I think one other thing with those kind of defenses, and that's a great quote from Blaine Gabbert. And it's fun to know some of the things that the Patriots did, in the week leading up to try and get ready for the confusion and complexity that was coming their way. Another thing to keep in mind when teams are doing that, when they're junking it up and walking around the line of scrimmage, they oftentimes don't get back out to the flat and they can't guard the sidelines. And Brady didn't do it a lot, but there were probably 4 or 5 plays, whether it was underneath to Mike Evans or kind of an intermediate to over the top shot that led to a touchdown or field goal, where Brady went that way. Because another thing a veteran quarterback knows in the moment, okay, they can do all this crazy stuff in the box. You win. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know if you're bringing 4 or if you're bringing 7. I do know that's a soft corner against Mike Evans. And if I'm protected, if we get in the right protection, I'm going to take that for 8 or 9 yards. You guys, nice job of confusing me, but you got nobody over there. And he did that just enough. And again, those led to points oftentimes. And so I go back to my original point. That's why I think he kind of won the day, even though he didn't have an awesome game, just because of the way he played with his mind.
Paul, I want to talk just a little bit about the scene and then about the Patriots. And one of the things that I want to point out about the scene is that, as last week I went around New England. I talked to quite a few fans, and I was convinced there would be a little pocket of dissent, at least in the stadium on Sunday night. That little pocket never really materialized, but I was convinced of that because when I went around and talked to fans, there were some who were not, in the Brady school. There were some who were angry that he left and who thought that maybe he was a little bit overrated and Belichick was the real Oz behind the curtain. But I do think that when you consider everything in totality, I do think what we saw from the crowd of 65,000 is that, Tommy, nobody here is to blame. This just happened. It's okay. We love you. We'll always love you. And it's not a situation like, a lot of fans in Green Bay were truly ticked off at Brett Favre in 2008 when he came back and tried to say, hey, this is my job. Aaron Rodgers, you got to wait. And a lot of Packer fans just were unhappy with his constant flip-flopping about that. But in this particular case, there was just nobody who was really in the stadium. It was mad at Tom Brady, and I thought that was significant. One other thing about the crowd itself, Dan Wetzel of Yahoo made this comment, and I looked around after he tweeted it, and I looked around, and he was right. The crowd stood for almost the whole game. It was almost like you were at a Springsteen concert where nobody ever sits down for the course of the game. And that is not the way the crowd is in Foxborough usually. But that crowd stood for basically the whole game. And I thought that was interesting. I want to just say 2 very quick things about the Patriots. And then in our remaining 5 minutes or so, I just like to hit you with 3 quick questions about what happened around the league on Sunday. And the thing about the Patriots is that I believe that there are some, and there have been some, who love Bill Belichick, who love everything that he's done for this organization. But honestly, in many ways, we're really uncertain about how much they have a good plan laid for the future. And if you wake up today and you're thinking about this game and you're a Patriots fan, I think you really have to say, we're okay with the future. We think the future is just absolutely fine right now. And so, that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I kept thinking to myself during the game, watching Mac Jones, what must he be thinking? What is going through his head? He didn't have anything to do with it. The New England Patriots last year in the draft, or last April in the draft, called his name. That's it. He's sort of an outsider into this whole thing. None of this is his doing. And yet he found himself having to compete against the GOAT in the GOAT's house. And, he hasn't even played well here yet, very well. And so those are the two observations I had. But I really left that stadium last night thinking that the New England Patriots are in pretty good hands.
I had kind of the same feeling. I go back, I think it was 2009. I was at the game at the old Metrodome when Favre with the Vikings hosted the Packers, and Brett was phenomenal that night. He was outstanding. The energy was even better than expected. But the whole time, Aaron Rodgers, who was pretty young in terms of experience at the time, while Brett was doing great, I was like, hey, this other guy's pretty good too. And it was kind of like a coming out party. I know he had played more than Mac had at that point, but it reminded me of that. While the main guy, the experienced guy, came out the winner, the other guy gave the other team's fan base a pretty good reason to feel awfully good about what they had going on.
All right, we're going to hit 3 games really quick, Paul. The first one I want to hit, and I did not see much of this game at all. Arizona 37, the Rams 20. That result really knocked me off my feet. I was so surprised at that, particularly because I just didn't think that anybody could really figure out what the Rams were doing on offense right now. And Matthew Stafford didn't have a horrible game or anything like that, but Kyle Murray's 3rd consecutive game of at least 75% completions. For the first time in Arizona Cardinals history, any Cardinals history, a quarterback has been that accurate 3 games in a row. What did you see here?
Yeah, 75% for Kyler Murray against that defense is tremendous. What I see with Kyler Murray, first of all, I think you have to look at what he's doing right now, what Cliff Kingsbury is allowing him to do in comparison to what he did last year. And his yards per attempt are up over 2 yards. 2 isn't a big number, but when you're getting more than 2, more than you did last year, he's pushing the ball downfield with success and accuracy. And it's not just the out of the pocket plays. He had the one magician type play, I think, on a 3rd and long where no other quarterback in the league, maybe Lamar Jackson, could have done it. But his other highlights were standing in the pocket, touch pass over the middle, drive pass to the sideline, nice touch down the field. I mean, he is playing a quarterback's quarterback position in addition to making some plays outside the pocket. And I think you hit it right on the head with Matthew Stafford. He didn't play poorly, Peter, but the way it looked in the previous month, it looked like, hey, can anybody make the Rams look pedestrian? And that's what the Cardinals were able to do. That they didn't get the best of him and make him look awful, but they made him look average, and that's doing something with that offense.
Before the games yesterday, I texted Eric DeCosta, the general manager of the Ravens, and I said, of all the strange roster things that have happened in the first 4 weeks of the season, and of course, when you have a lot of injuries, and there have been a lot in the NFL early, you get some strange decisions, people getting signed, people getting cut. But of all of them, the fact that Latavius Murray, Le'Veon Bell, and Devontae Freeman all are on the Baltimore Ravens 53-man roster. And as it turns out, all were active and all carried the ball at Denver. And I remember thinking how in trouble the Baltimore Ravens were when they had that the scourge of injuries at the running back position. But look at how they have kind of solved it. They have really gone back and look, not a single one of those guys was great, but those are the 3 backs who carried the ball in a 16-point road win over an undefeated team. So I thought that, and again, I only saw highlights during the evening. But I thought that Baltimore really that was an impressive showing by Baltimore.
To me, it speaks to the fact that defenses, when they play against Baltimore, Peter, for the run game, their number one worry is the quarterback. All the running backs are just supplements to the quarterback. I mean, how many offenses can you really say that about? I mean, maybe the one we just talked about in Arizona with Kyler Murray, but all those running backs from the back nine of the best years of their career, but they can have success because when it comes to worrying about the ground game, they're thinking about Lamar. And those other guys are kind of an afterthought. And if they pound out a C+ kind of game, well done.
Last game for a quick thought from Paul Burmeister before we go to Dan Shaughnessy. Seattle, San Francisco. I was not expecting this. Now, I was not expecting Seattle to come out and look, I'm not saying it was an absolutely totally clean game, but I am saying that it was one of those games that this was one of the most important games, I think, of Russell Wilson's tenure in Seattle. And you say, how can you say that? It's week 4. He had never lost 3 games in a row. And Seattle, if they lost this game, was going to be 1-3 in a great division, a very competitive division. They were going to be the clear cellar dwellers and coming into a short week game against the Los Angeles Rams. What'd you see in Seattle?
I think it's such a fun game these years when the Niners and Seahawks get together. There's so much. I mean, each one has its own personality, but the coaching is good. The storylines are good. At the end of this one, though, Peter, I mean, to me, it's like we have Russell Wilson and you don't. See you next time. It was just one of those kind of games. If you go to the 3 most important plays of the game for either team, Russell Wilson's involved. He had some good runs. He had some awesome passes. His bottom line stats weren't great, but if you look at the highlights that mattered most, it was Russell Wilson being Russell Wilson. And there's a lot of other things that happened in that game. I don't want to simplify it to one thing, but my thought when I was looking at that game, we have number 3 and you guys don't. So good luck.
Paul, listen, thanks. We're going to settle into a more regular podcast existence starting next week. I feel like the last couple of weeks we have been very New England centric. We're going to hit the other 30 teams, New England, Tampa. We're going to hit the other 30 teams heavy starting next week. But I really appreciate you joining me. I think that for the people who really can't get their fill of both Brady, the Patriots, the Bucs, I hope they learned a little something from this, and I appreciate you breaking it down with me.
Peter, get some rest. We'll do it again soon.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.